So thank you all for everyone who's participating today and joining us for today's event titled Restorative Practices in Youth Justice, Lessons Learned from Area Experts. My name is Jason Smith. I'm the Executive Director for the Michigan Center for Youth Justice. We have an amazing panel. You heard us kind of chit-chatting as you've entered the room, but amazing folks doing great work, all based in Washtenaw County, where the Michigan Center for Youth Justice is actually based, in my home community as well. So I'm excited to allow you all to hear from them and the great work that they're doing. We're excited to have 100 people, over 100 people registered for our Zoom, through our Zoom link, and happy to see people joining us on our YouTube channel to view the event as well. So for the folks on Zoom, please use the Q&A function to ask questions to the panelists, and we'll also be monitoring the chat in YouTube for questions after the panelists speak as well. They'll respond to them. So just before I do introductions, just a quick explanation of why MCYJ is hosting this event. We have made this entire week Restorative Justice Week. We've dedicated the week to focusing on restorative justice. And in addition to this event, we're also hosting a restorative justice training later on in the week. And we're also highlighting articles and stories related to restorative justice and restorative practices, particularly those that pertain to young people who come in contact with the justice system throughout the week on our social media and in our monthly newsletter. We also touched on the issue as well. As an organization that advocates statewide for policy reforms that makes justice system involvement fair and effective and equitable for all young people who come in contact with it, we really believe that having a focus on restorative justice is in alignment with our mission here at the Michigan Center for Youth Justice. It acknowledges that young people who get into trouble are still kids, and that as much as possible, we must continue to shift away from an emphasis on guilt and punishment that has historically been a part of the traditional justice system model, and shift to one that's more trauma-informed focused and has a balance focused on accountability and healing relationships. So that's really why we wanted to lift up restorative practices this week. There's a lot of popularity happening with restorative justices as a practice and as an alternative model to the traditional system, though I also want to be clear and acknowledge that this is not a new practice. It has roots in, it has indigenous roots, both here in America and across the world. And there has been communities that have been using restorative practices to resolve conflict and heal relationships for centuries. And it's important for us to lift that up, to have a truly authentic conversation. So now I'll introduce the panelists and jump right into the questions. So first up is Judge Timothy Connors. Judge Connors is the presiding judge of Washtenaw County's Peacemaking Court. He has been a state court judge since 1991, and for 11 years, he served as chief judge. He co-chairs the Michigan Tribal State Federal Forum. Judge Connors presides over cases in the civil and domestic divisions of Washtenaw County Trial Court and handles the neglect and abuse docket for the juvenile court. Judge Connors works to incorporate peacemaking principles, philosophies, and procedures shared by tribal communities into state court justice systems. And this effort is supported by the Michigan Supreme Court. Next, we have Ellie Savitt. Ellie currently serves as the Washtenaw County prosecuting attorney. Ellie is also a lecturer at the University of Michigan, where he teaches in the areas of state and local government, civil rights, impact litigation, and environmental law. In 2016, Mr. Savitt began serving as senior advisor and counsel to Detroit Mayor Mike Duggan. And then prior to his appointment by Mayor Duggan, he served as law clerk for Justices Sandra Day O'Connor and Ruth Bader Ginsburg on the United States Supreme Court. Ellie holds a law degree from the University of Michigan. Next up is Nicolette Hort. Nicolette works in the Juvenile Delinquency Division at the Washtenaw County Office of the Public Defender, where she has been for over 10 years and has served as an attorney for 4 years. She sees criminal defense work through a different lens and fully understands that any reform to our justice system starts with juvenile work. Her work is centered on restoring and assisting young people from a holistic perspective, addressing their behavior and legal troubles, but also mental health issues, self-esteem, empowerment, family support, housing, and education and employment. And then finally, Belinda Doolin is the executive director of the Dispute Resolution Center, serving both Washtenaw and Livingston counties. In that role, she and her team have implemented a variety of conflict resolution programs in district and circuit courts. Additionally, services have been provided to schools. You might have heard us just talking about that, serving students, families, and school staff in identifying and resolving barriers and issues that affect student relationships. The Dispute Resolution Center partners with the Washtenaw County Peacemaking Court to provide peacemaking circles to families in the child protection and delinquency system. So accomplished folks with a lot of great information that they'll be able to share. So starting in the order of the introductions with Judge Connor, the first question that I have for the panelists is just to describe in more detail than perhaps I provided in the introduction about what your role is locally in providing restorative justice.
Thank you, Jason. And first of all, I really want to thank you, not only on behalf of myself and Belinda Doolin, but from the entire Tribal State Federal Forum, that you acknowledged that restorative justice has indigenous roots in peacemaking. This is really, really critical. There's a Tlingit saying that I heard from an elder that says, if you are going to sing my song, say my name. And this is an issue where I really think is important as we move forward, that the indigenous peacemaking partner with and walk side by side, and we each enhance restorative justice. So to start off like that, I was really pleased that you did that. As you indicated, I'm presiding judge of the Washtenaw County Peacemaking Court, which was supported and approved by the Michigan Supreme Court for almost the last decade. And I need to acknowledge I could never have done it, not only without the support of the Supreme Court, but at the very beginning, Belinda Doolin, when we first started talking about issues of race, issues of economic, historical problems, what could we do about it? And I had learned about peacemaking from the Tribal State Federal Forum and our tribal neighbors. And she took a jump and a leap of faith with me. And she has been at the very beginning of this. The Michigan Supreme Court's Tribal State Federal Forum, I'm so pleased to see we have Justice Megan Kavanaugh first on the chat here today. Her father before that was the champion. And then Bridget McCormick was the champion. And when Megan Kavanaugh came along, she has been more involved than any Supreme Court judge I've ever seen. And we had a wonderful conversation today going over various issues. So I'm the non-native member, the only non-native member of the Native American Rights Fund's Advisory Board for the Peacemaking Initiative. We work closely with tribal peacemakers, and Belinda Doolin has as well throughout the country. And that's what we bring locally to restorative justice in Washtenaw County.
Thank you. Thank you, Judge Connors. Ellie, I think you're up next.
Sure, and it's great to be here with such great colleagues from across the county and from the state. So of course I am the prosecuting attorney for Washtenaw County, and we are at the prosecutor's office believer that, as so many folks have been saying for so long, including the folks on this panel, there is so much harm that ultimately is better addressed not through our traditional criminal legal system, but through alternative means like restorative justice. If you think about what our criminal legal system does, in many ways, it is set up to disincentivize survivors of a crime from getting what many times they want at core, which is an acknowledgement of the harm that was done to them, taking responsibility for their actions, and ultimately an individualized way to make amends. The reason that our criminal justice system is not a great place to get that out of the person that committed harm is precisely because of its adversarial nature. The moment that you accept responsibility for what you did in the criminal legal system, you are pleading guilty and you are subject to punishment. And that punishment is oftentimes a one-size-fits-all approach in which it's not individualized to the needs of the survivor of harm. We say something bad has happened to you as the survivor, and so we're going to do something bad to somebody else in terms of incarceration, jail, prison, fines, whatever. And so our view, and we're so glad to be working in Washtenaw County, where we have such great partners that have been working on restorative justice for really many years, is that wherever possible in the justice system, we should be deflecting and diverting cases out if the survivor of harm wants that into a restorative process. Fundamentally, this is about standing up for survivors and victims of crime, but I believe that standing up for survivors and victims means listening to them. And when they say they want something different, we need to be respecting that. So we're in the process of building out with our partners at the Peacemaking Court and the Public Defender's Office and the Dispute Resolution Center, really a robust expansion of restorative practices here in Washtenaw County as an alternative to the traditional criminal legal system. And where we fit in as prosecutors is, quite candidly, often the prosecutor is the actor in the criminal legal system that sets the playing field, because we can decide whether to charge, with what to charge, whether somebody gets an opportunity to be diverted out of the criminal legal system or whether they stay on that traditional path. And our view is that, wherever possible, we can address the harm without reliance on the criminal legal system. And if that's what the survivor wants, and if that's how harm can be addressed, that works better for everybody. So we've got some exciting partnerships that are already in place, but we're looking forward to rolling out more details later this year. But I'm so thrilled to be here. And again, I'm newly elected. I took office in 2021, and we're moving forward together. But this is really due to the work and the advocacy of folks like Judge Connors and folks like Belinda and folks like our Public Defender's Office writ large, and so many other actors that have been working to make this a reality for so many years.
Thank you so much, Ellie. Ms. Hord.
Thank you. I first just want to thank Judge Connors for inviting me to be on this wonderful panel. I'm grateful to be here. I'm also very grateful to both Delphia Simpson and Joy Gaines of my office, who have paved the way for this amazing work. I would say, from a public defender standpoint, our role in restorative justice is to always support any avenue by which our young people are able to be truly heard. When Jason first started talking, and he mentioned that young people are in fact young people and we should continue to treat them as such, I think that was so very powerful. The work that we've been able to do with the Peacemaking Court has been unprecedented. Truly sitting in those circles. I was not aware of peacemaking prior to that, but truly sitting in those circles and seeing the ability for families to have conversations. What we don't realize is sometimes in the hustle and bustle of things, people aren't talking. They aren't communicating the way that they should. They're not listening to young people and getting from them what it is that they actually need to feel heard and feel supported. I think our role from a public defender standpoint as well is to give that voice to young people by any means necessary. And aside from just the Peacemaking Court, I think even on our formal docket, we're doing some strategic work around restorative justice, because we're seeing that what we've done historically has not worked, especially for our young men and young women of color and our Black and brown young boys, and giving them that strength that they need to truly feel supported is our role in restorative justice.
Thank you, Nicolette. And Ms. Doolin.
First, I also want to thank you all for the invitation to be a part of this panel. It's always a delight. I learn so much every time I get to sit and listen to both Judge Connors and Prosecutor Savitt. And the Public Defender's Office and the DRC have become fast friends as we have worked together on a number of cases involving very young people who found themselves in the criminal justice system being charged with violence against members of their household. Our role in this locally, I think, extends back probably a dozen years. I think the DRC was one of a handful of people on the front line ringing the bell, sounding an alarm for restorative justice in Washtenaw County. It was around the time that the community read the book, The New Jim Crow, that I began to hear people questioning the traditional system, the criminal justice system, as well as the disciplinary systems in our schools. And that presented an opportunity for us to expand ourselves in our work and our mission at the DRC to at least create a safe platform for us to have this discussion and deliberation around what this work is about and how do we apply it to real people in real life situations. So our role has been multifaceted. We did work with schools. As Jason knows, we've been working with Skyline High School for, I found out last night in a PTO meeting, since 2014. There's a Sky Squad there that I've been honored to train every cohort of students since 2014 to do just what we do in the adult world around peer-to-peer conflict. And then when the peacemaking court was being developed, I was asked to be at the table, and that's when I began to work with Judge Connors in designing what that court will look like and how the mechanics of it. You know, we always have to think about how it works institutionally. How do you get a case to peacemaking? Who do you train to be peacemakers? How do we make this accessible by the community? So we've been a part of that. And now we are excited to expand that onto Mr. Sabat's office and work on more cases that will divert and deflect young people from the system. Many people have heard me speak about this, but we have to pause and let these systems be designed and be implemented so that we can get back to kids being kids. Very often our children are highly criminalized and we treat them as adults, maybe unintentionally, but we do in our institutions. And so the role that the DRC wants to play and wants to continue to play is giving us intentional pause so that we can be thoughtful about the human beings that are behind each of these cases and the people who are impacted by every charge, by every petition that is presented to a court, by every deliberation, every hearing. A family, a person in a family is being impacted by that. So the role that we also have is being a voice in reminding the system players that real people are being impacted. And can we at least pump the brakes long enough so that we can see how we can restore these individuals, get relationships back in balance, and as well as help people be accountable for the harm that they've caused.
Thank you, Belinda. So for the next question, and you all kind of touched on this, but just if you're interested in going into a bit more detail, starting back at the top with Judge Connors, what do you see as the major benefits of using restorative practices with youth?
It obviously increases the potential for positive outcome for a youth. And it definitely lessens the risk that we're going to contribute to an already harmful outcome. One of the things when we were first learning from our tribal neighbors, our tribal courts, I was really privileged. My wife and I, we sat on the bench at Little Traverse Bay Band. We sat on the bench at Little River with the tribal court judges. And I saw then, when we were first thinking about this, I saw how they handled a juvenile case. And as they went through their peacemaking circle, and believe me, it's harder than anything we put our kids through. But at the end of it, when the youth understands what I did hurt some people, I understand that now. I feel badly about it. I've talked to them. They have forgiven me. We figured out how we're going to move on. We all learned from it. They had a ceremony where they would take the juvenile file in the middle of the fire and burn it and say, you are no longer this label. You are back on the path of a human being. We thank it. That's why we give it up. We thank it because what happened brought us to the opportunity to get back on track. But that label will never stay with you. I started crying. I looked at my wife and I said, I don't know if my lifetime we could ever do that on a state court bench, but by God, if we ever can, wouldn't that be something? I'm gonna spend my life trying to do it. The great work that Nicolette's doing, we can't burn the petition, but we don't authorize it. So then we let the youth rip it up. And that's as close as we've gotten yet, but by God, it's wonderful. The other thing it does is it breaks down the silos. Institutionally, we act as if there's a juvenile court and there's a child welfare court and there's a delinquency docket and there's the criminal docket and there's the family docket. This is all of us. There is no them and us. It's us, and it moves through that. So it breaks down the silos. And the most important, what Nicolette was saying is listen. One of the things peacemaking. There's reason they taught me. We have 2 ears and 1 mouth. We should be listening twice as much as we talk. And if we listen to the voice of the youth, we're doing some work on the development of a resiliency court, which is really based in peacemaking. And it's been shared to those who listen to youth, who are involved in the system, who say, the state thinks you own me, that I'm a piece of property for you to be processed. I'm not. I'm a kid. Those are the kinds of voices we should be listening to.
Thank you, Judge Connors. Prosecutor Savage.
So I echo everything that Judge Connors said, and I'm not sure I can put it more eloquently, but if I can just expand a little bit on the promise of restorative justice from 2 perspectives. One is, of course, from the perspective of the defendant, and this is particularly true with respect to young people. When you engage in restorative justice, which requires a young person to really internalize the harm that they have done and understand how they have hurt somebody else, what you see is, for young people especially, the recidivism rates decline dramatically, because it's not just, you did something bad and now we're going to punish you. It's really a process by which you have to face the harm that you have done and internalize it. And for a developing mind, a developing young person, that can be a really powerful teaching moment. So restorative justice ultimately impacts public safety for the better. And again, the data on this is quite clear. Where restorative justice has been used, especially in the juvenile context, recidivism rates fall. But the other thing is we need to keep in mind the needs of survivors and the needs of victims. There is really good data on this too. Danielle Sered runs an incredible restorative justice program called Common Justice out of New York City. And they give survivors of crime a choice. Do you want to go down the traditional criminal legal path, or would you prefer, as an alternative, to engage in a restorative justice process? And, I'm not kidding you with these numbers. You can double check me, because I didn't believe it myself when I first read this. When given the choice, when given the actual choice, 90% of crime survivors, and these include really, pretty serious crimes, 90% of crime survivors choose restorative justice as an alternative to the traditional criminal legal system. And around 80% express satisfaction with the outcome of restorative justice, as opposed to just around half in the traditional criminal legal system. Now think about why that might be. One is, again, as I mentioned in response to the previous question, oftentimes the criminal legal system just isn't set up to give survivors what they need. But the other thing is, it can be really re-traumatizing for a survivor to go through that process, to sit in court, to face their accuser, who is, again, disincentivized from taking responsibility for what they've done, because that means a guilty plea. It's harmful in a lot of ways to survivors. And at best, at the end of the day, they learn that somebody is, getting punished, going to detention, going to jail or prison, going to a placement facility in the juvenile context. And they haven't had a real chance to have the harm that was done to them fixed. So the question is, like, why wouldn't we do this? If it both reduces recidivism and survivors want it, and they're more satisfied with the result when they choose it, isn't this a better way, especially when, as we're looking at doing in Washtenaw County, we're doing it when the survivor asks for, when the survivor opts for that choice?
Thank you, Ellie. Ms. Ford.
Thank you. So it's very important to think about how young people are relational in terms of the benefits. A lot of times there are conversations that they're not even able to have with their parents until we bring them in circle. They're facing things that some of us kind of forget in terms of job loss or increased poverty or issues in their neighborhood. They're not able to sit down with their parents and understand their own history or their own trauma and things that they've been through. And peacemaking circles not only provide a safe space for that, but they start those conversations with families to see, how have I been impacted intergenerationally, systematically, as a parent, before I can go ahead and support you for whatever reason that you find yourself before the juvenile court. So that's one aspect of looking at it in terms of building those relationships with families. The other benefit is not taking a paternalistic view from a court perspective and saying, we know best. We know how to help your child. We know the things that we should do for your child, rather than saying, how can we help a family? What is it that you need that we can offer you in terms of support? And then when you look at another restorative practice in terms of doing actual projects and being able to support them with their hands versus just telling them, you have to do this and you have to be better. Getting them involved with our Youth Arts Alliance program. Youth Arts Alliance has been an amazing blessing to both the formal docket as well as the peacemaking docket. A lot of my young people come to me and they say, I've been involved with this other restorative practice that helps me to fuel my imagination, to fuel the things that I like to do. I like music, I like art. And then they're able to feel proud of something, feel proud that they've accomplished something other than just being punished by this system that has not helped them or helped their family. They've seen their family members in and out of this system that they know of, rather than giving them the support that they need. So there, from our perspective, are tons of benefits in terms of reducing recidivism, building those relationships with their parents, with other supports. There are some supports through our court that the young people sometimes never would have had access to, activities that they're able to do that they wouldn't otherwise have access to. And these are the things that we need to hone in on, versus saying, okay, we're going to just go ahead and put you in detention for whatever period of time, because that has not worked. And we've seen that it has not worked.
Thank you, Nicola, and shout out to the Youth Arts Alliance and the great work that they do, Heather Martin. Ms. Doolin?
Yeah, and I'll ditto your shout out to Heather and Youth Arts Alliance as well. In addition to everything that everyone else said, I'd like to add just two more other benefits that I think restorative justice and peacemaking brings to the surface. These approaches to problem solving allows us to get to the root of the problem. What I noticed is that when kids were in school, they broke a rule, they get suspended, and no one talked about the why. We know the rule has been broken, and we know for this infraction, this is the remedy, this is the punishment that will ensue, but we still don't know why they did it in the first place. So restorative justice and peacemaking are intentionally designed to facilitate a dialogue that helps people get to the why behind the behavior. The DRC does not believe that children are born and decide to do bad things. So there's a why that motivates their behavior. And we want them to be able to articulate what was going on in their lives and get to the root of that problem. And what we learn is that the presenting behavior is rooted in a lot of chaos and turmoil oftentimes. What we learn is that the presenting behavior is rooted in misunderstandings and poor communication oftentimes. So in that circle moment, they're able to get clarity, clarification, give clarity around their behavior and take responsibility for it and move forward. And what we know is that when they participate in crafting their solution, they're the higher probability it is for them to actually do it. One of the DRC's functions is to go back and look at past cases to determine a compliance rate. And those who experienced a restorative model were compliant like in 97, 98% of the cases that we had to check on. And I compare that to mediation where the compliance rate is around 85%. Still very high, that's something for me to brag about. Those are still high compliance rates. But I look at the two paths, the two models, and not to disparage either, but I know that in peacemaking in the restorative circles, we spend a lot of time talking and listening to one another and understanding why and addressing those unmet needs in a more intentional way. So the young people who have offended someone else, when they talk about their own needs and people actually listen to it and respond to it favorably, those young people are able to move forward. And some of Ms. Hord's cases was in our compliance review from last year. And she said, all my kids are doing well. They have not reoffended, no new petitions. The families are not calling. They're not calling her and they're not calling the prosecutor's office, which is very typical. When the kids get out of control again, they will call the prosecutor's office or they'll call the public defender and say, what should I do? And the parents did not call back. So that's one benefit. We're able to get to the root of it. The second one is empathy. In a zero tolerance environment, the adults who created that rule and enforce it upon children probably did not think about what we were going to take away from the kids when we have zero tolerance. If you break a rule, you will be punished and you will be excluded from the school community or the community through detention. What we take away is the ability for that young person to learn from his or her mistakes. We're so focused on the punishment and the procedural stuff of court and school and meetings and hearings and the rules that govern that, we miss the opportunity for that young person to understand the impact of his or her behavior. So once a person who has done harm can hear how it impacted others, including the actual person that they harmed, the family members that were impacted by it, the child who did the harm, the impact on his or her own family. Once they can hear all of that, I have seen this in real life. A light bulb goes off and they say, all I thought I was doing was jacking you in the moment. I didn't realize my mom was going to be upset and fall to pieces. I didn't realize that by coming to school meetings, she misses work, and missing work means missing wages. Missing wages means less money. Less money means a bill may not be paid. I didn't realize that the person I harmed, I was also harming his or her parents or grandparents, caregivers, other members of the community. So when they put the full narrative together, everyone tells their story. And when we put it together, it's a much deeper and a much heavier narrative. And what I have seen is that these young people say, oh man, I didn't know. So that empathy gets sparked in them and they begin to care about the people that they've harmed. We don't get that when we punish them and put them away. We miss that opportunity. And in my mind, that opportunity is a part of our growth and our development. We were all kids one day, all of us on the screen. There was a time in our lives that we were a child. And somewhere in our upbringing, we learned how to care for others. We learned how to be empathetic, even for the mean people, even for the people we didn't like in school. We learned to empathize with them on some level. But when we are very quick to separate these kids from that trusted community that they thrive in, we take away their ability to learn to be empathetic, to learn to be caring. And with that, to receive empathy. I have yet to meet a kid that is so challenging that they could not be helped. Kids who are not being their best self, and I say this a lot to kids when I'm with them, I quote Brian Stevenson, we are better than the worst thing that we've done. I remind them that they are better than the worst thing that they've done. More often than not, no one has told them that. We have labeled them as the bad kid. So hearing that, even the adults in the room who hear that learn to be empathetic for even the kid who's acting out. They need us the most. And what peacemaking has taught me is that pushing them away and distancing ourselves is not the solution. Being proximate with those young people who need more support and lining up as a community to wrap our arms around them, to give them support, helps them to always be their best self. Because now they care enough about Belinda to want to act right? They care enough about Jason to want to give their best self all the time. And we've seen this happen over and over again. So I am one to say that the restorative practices for youth and the benefits that we gain from that really, really cancels out anything that we think that we're gaining from zero tolerance policies.
Thank you, Belinda. At the halfway stretch with questions, and then we'll kick it to the audience. So starting again with Judge Connors, what do you see as the challenges to setting up restorative practices for youth in a community, and how do you propose addressing those challenges?
Thank you, Jason. Well, I think, first of all, you have to understand the difference in the worldviews that we have in our justice system and the worldview that restorative justice and peacemaking comes out of. And you have to understand why we have those differences in worldviews. And if you go back and you study our history, and particularly our legal history, we, in America, we are the result of 5 different European colonizing influences. And when you're a colonizing force, we've seen this around the world. The notion is that you are superior to those who are already there. And you come and you subjugate them, and then you take. And once you've taken, you've got this inconvenient truth of what do we do about it? And so our system is designed about power, control, and property. Our system is always talking about rights, because if we keep saying it's my right to do this to extinguish other rights, we already create a system where we have decreased our ability to work well together. And we create narratives about populations to justify the laws that are in there. Belinda was talking about the Jim Crow laws, et cetera. So we need to look at that. The interesting thing is not only the Trail of Tears, but if you study this across the board in this country, Native Americans were routinely, there was cultural and physical genocide, and they were put into slavery as well. But the inconvenient truth is they had to move them off to the land, and they wanted to develop the land, and the best way to do that for profit was to enslave people again, because they were somehow, not as this idea of superiority, and then we brought them over to work the land. So we have that root still in our system of attitudinally, that there are some who are more entitled than others, and we're still seeing that happening today. There's a word, the Anishinaabe, who are the tribes, primarily the tribes are here in Michigan. I see this concept of rights in our courts as we view our children. The state somehow has the right to do this to a child. Parents talk about rights. Parental rights, when we really go back, when you look at it, is about responsibility. That's a fundamental concept of peacemaking. Relationships, relatedness, responsibility internally with each other, to the community, back again. But we keep talking about parental rights as if our child is a piece of property. We talked about women in this country as if they were property. We talked about African Americans coming over as if they were property. And we talked about the indigenous population as savages, who we had the right to civilize. There is a word in Anishinaabe, they say we don't have a word for child like it translates to English. This I learned from Judge Petoskey. He said the closest we have is the word panoje, panoje. And he said, literally translated, it means young spirit coming forth. You see, it changes the whole dynamics, the idea of 7 generations, that we are the product of the 7 generations that came before us. We have the responsibility to hold our children on our shoulders and carry them forward from the work that came before us. So it affects the 7 generations that come back. You see, it's not about the moment and my accumulating wealth or my accumulating control over others. It's taking that was given us from our ancestors, putting that on our shoulders and carrying it on to the future. So that worldview is so fundamentally different. And if you go back and you see it currently in the rhetoric politically, in our cases, you go back to those Supreme Court cases and how they viewed those situations, and the narratives that were created to justify our legal system of power and control and property and punishment. And you go back and actually at the time, you see those who were first here. I'm looking at up in Sitka, Alaska, community's been up there, really was pretty remote from colonization because they're so far north. They've developed their whole truth and resiliency court and peacemaking court and all the things we're actually drawing from. And they put in the book they sent me, a quote from a priest that showed up, and up in Alaska it was primarily the Russians that were the colonizing influence. But you know, the priest had gone up there and the Russians had characterized it. And this is an exact quote of what he found, 1840. This is how he described the native population. These people detest lying and never spread false rumors. They never boast their exploits and despise hypocrisy in every respect. Fighting and murder among them is unheard of. There is neither flattery or empty promises. There are no swear words in Alouette. They didn't have any prisons. They didn't have any jails. So we're clearly doing something wrong. We have 4.3% of the world's population and 24% of the world's incarcerated population. So I think the challenge is we have to start with worldview and why that worldview, and we really frankly have to start looking at truth and reconciliation hearings in this country. If we're ever going to move on, we have to acknowledge why we got here, how harmful that was, and this is the effect, and we make a conscious decision to acknowledge it and move on. Thank you.
Thank you, Judge. Prosecutor Sabat, challenges.
So I think the biggest challenge is, frankly, the challenge that comes about whenever you're proposing changes or doing things differently in our criminal legal system, which is that there are people out there who will use fear and use the politics of fear to try to stand in the way of change. I love that Judge Connors mentioned that, the United States of America, the quote unquote land of the free, incarcerates more people per capita than any country on the face of the planet. Now, we are not the safest country on the face of the planet. So if incarceration and our traditional criminal legal system beget community safety, we would expect to be seeing a lot more in terms of result. But let's be honest about that. There are people that either have a political agenda that stands in the way of doing things differently, or they have buy-in, in the system that puts them in the way of doing things differently. And fear is a powerful base emotion that can be used to galvanize opposition to any sort of change. And when you're looking at something like restorative justice, which sounds hopeful, which sounds healing, what you see, frankly, is sometimes people are just going to pivot back to to fear and say, well, if you do this, aren't you just letting somebody off with a slap on the wrist? Aren't you, allowing them to evade real accountability? And the truth of the matter is, the answer to that is no. Real restorative justice takes hard work. It takes internalizing the harm that you did. And in many ways, that's a lot harder for a person, and it requires a lot more work than just to be passively sent to jail or prison or detention, or have something imposed on you by the court, because you're passive in that. Restorative justice takes work. It takes introspection. It takes really understanding and internalizing the harm that you're done. It's not letting anybody off easy. The other thing I'll just say is there's two powerful ways that you can move change in our society and certainly in our legal system. And those are by appealing to fear and by appealing to hope. And that sounds corny, but you know what? Look at every single successful presidential campaign over the past century, and probably well beyond that, though I used to be an 8th grade U.S. history teacher, and I taught just from the Civil War to the present, so 20th century is really where I'm best. But every one of them, fear or hope. And restorative justice is powerful, I think, because of the healing that it can provide, and because of the hope that it provides to individuals involved in the legal system and involved in the community. And, we need to, frankly, fight fear with hope, because we see that a fear-based system, a punishment-oriented system, has not worked. If we lift up the stories of real healing, of real accountability, of real restorative practices taking root, and the transformative effects that has both for the person who committed harm and the healing that comes out of that for the survivor, we can change the narrative. But that's the only way that I think writ large we are going to enact real systemic change to our juvenile system or to our legal system. I'm guilty of this myself. I like numbers. I like looking at data. I like looking at all that. But at the end of the day, I think what appeals to people and what will get broad buy-in is these stories of hope, these stories of healing, and lifting those up as an alternative to the way things have been done.
Thank you. Ms. Ford?
Thank you. So I took a different approach to this question. I think that if we're looking at the true challenge is introspection from stakeholders, right? I think it takes a lot to be able to say, I am in some ways, in arguendo, protecting the status quo, right? We've done something the same way for a very long time. And we think, even though we can kind of see that it is not or has not worked, we think that it's working. We think that the work that we're doing is impacting lives and affecting change, right? And so I think that where we are now, especially here in Washtenaw County, we are in a different position to truly make that change, rather than to continue having conversations about things that make us uncomfortable or say that we want to impact the lives of our young people. We're in an actual position where we're able to do that. So in working with the new prosecutor and being able to divert and deflect cases, as well as working with Judge Connors on a peacemaking docket, and even on the formal docket with the new court administrator, thinking outside of the box. We see that certain things have been in place for years and years, but they have not yielded us the results. They have not brought families any closer. They have not stopped putting young Black boys in our youth home, right? Doing things that we're saying we're committed to these changes, right? And then we want to have the outcomes and the data that show this hasn't worked in the past. So let's go back. Let's look at that data. Let's see how we've impacted these families. Let's see how long someone has been under court supervision. Let's actually see and discuss how long someone has been sent to a placement facility, or how many times they've been sent to a placement facility, and has that really worked? I think that the challenge is saying, for all of us, right, that we have our own implicit bias, that we're standing sometimes in the way of our own freedoms against not being as open as we should, not thinking literally outside of that box as to how we can best service our young people. And then the way that we overcome that challenge is having conversations such as these, trying something new, even if it doesn't work, right? If we're saying this is an evidence-based practice, let's give it a try. Let's see if it works. And then report back, get some feedback from actual families. That's the one thing that is so important about peacemaking. Every time we have a docket, we're able to ask the family, do you think this circle is working? What are you learning from it? What are you getting from it? Rather than just saying you're ordered to do whatever class or whatever circle, rather than just imposing what it is that we think is best for these families, saying, what do you think is actually working? What do you need from the court as a whole? So I think that while there are several challenges, I think that we're in a better position to address those challenges than we've ever been.
Thank you. Ms. Doolin.
So I think Ms. Hort should drop the mic on that one. There's nothing more to say. I'll add to all of the comments that I think another challenge that I see as a practitioner, a person who leads a nonprofit in a community space, who partners with institutions and systems to forward the work of restorative practices and peacemaking. One of the challenges that I have come across frequently is how we think about kids in the first place. I've asked educators, why did you select education as a field? How do you feel about kids? Do we have to adulterize children? Do we have to criminalize youth behavior? A kid takes a pencil off another kid's desk. Is stealing property? Why is it stealing property? So allowing ourselves a safe space to question our own thoughts and attitudes around children, which gets into a conversation about diversity, equity, and inclusion. The conversation about power and control. It's not easy for me to talk about restorative practice in a system without talking about power and control and privilege. That is one conversation that we don't want to have because it's extremely uncomfortable. It's extremely imbalanced for me with some individuals, but it's a conversation that I learned that we have to be able to have it to get over the challenges. The other stuff, teaching people how to do circles, preparing people for a circle conversation, I can do that with my eyes closed. But the systems that we try to create, that we try to evolve into a restorative practice ecosystem, if you will, has to get balanced in a sense of privilege and power and equity and inclusion. We have to figure out how they all blend together. What do we need to get rid of? And what do we want to keep? And I see overcoming that as a personal journey. It's a journey that I had to take as a practitioner. If I'm going to do this work with authenticity and integrity, who am I in conflict? Where does my privilege lie? What do I really think about kids? Do I believe that they are bad kids? How do I feel about the labeling that our systems do? How do I embrace children? How do I talk about love and care for children? How do I let kids be kids, even if they're not being their best self in the moment? How do I give them a safe space to learn from their own mistakes? We have to think about that as adults. Kids are kids, they are not adults. Regardless of what the policy says, because you're 17 and a half, does that make me more grown up than a 15-year-old? I'm not quite sure. In my parenting experience, I would say no. So we have to find ways to balance that, to figure it out and to let go of some of those old practices, as Nicolette said, to suspend ourselves of this notion that I'm going to be the custodian of the status quo. This is the way we've always done it. When do we challenge that thinking and come up with something new that fits into this restorative narrative? I think a couple other things that we can do is creating safe spaces for kids throughout the county. The courts cannot do this alone. So whoever's in the audience today, if you're working, whatever community space you're in, how can that space be purposed to be a safe space for our children? They need safe spaces to grow, safe spaces to play. I know we talk about court cases and conflict all the time, but I also see the children who just need a safe space to go and play. We don't provide that willingly as a community so much. If you can have money, you can join a gym, you can pay to play. We have had cases on the diversion docket for children who have been charged with violence in the home, where one of the remedies is just to be on a team and play with other children and not feel so different and excluded and left out because mom doesn't have the $300 to pay to enroll that kid on a team, or the kid doesn't have good enough grades, or whatever the reason that we exclude that child. The kid wanted to play, and actually when he started playing on basketball as a result of peacemaking circles, we got him on a team. He's doing great because that connection, that being proximate with his peers, being able to demonstrate that he can do something well, like make baskets, really lifted him up. And then he wanted to be his best self for his mom all the time. So we forget about the role of play with children. And the last thing I'll mention, that restorative practices requires that we allow ourselves to be vulnerable in those conversations. And that's the hard work that Ellie was talking about. Kids have reported that being in a restorative circle is harder than being kicked out of school. Kids have told me that being in a restorative circle is harder than sitting in court, because in court you just kind of sit and you can dream and daydream and look away and you halfway listening and whatever. In a restorative circle, you're required to listen. And at some point we're going to ask you to speak too. So we had to figure out a way how to normalize being vulnerable in a safe way, putting the guard down so that you can really fully listen and embrace what another person is saying, and also putting that guard down so that I can speak fully and share myself with others, my emotional self, what I'm thinking, what I'm feeling with others. That is a great deal of vulnerability. So if you've been a tough guy, if you've been practicing to be that tough kid for years and years and years, it's hard to be vulnerable. So as a society, as a community, we can give kids the permission and the safe space to be vulnerable. And I think that will help us overcome the challenges that we have as well.
Thank you. And I think, Belinda, you had a perfect segue to the last question from the moderator, at least. I want to make sure that we have some time for the audience Q&A. Just a quick glance of the participant list, or the attendee list. It shows that we have a statewide audience, which I'm excited to see. And we have to have some acknowledgement that in many ways, Washtenaw County is advanced in moving restorative justice practices forward compared to other communities that might be at the starting block. So if I could ask you to quickly just put on a technical assistance hat from the role you sit in, the position you're in, starting again with Judge Connors, what are some key steps that you would recommend for communities who do not currently utilize restorative justice to start implementing these practices?
Sorry, Jason. I meant to mention that this is a stated goal of the Tribal State Federal Forum, the implementation of peacemaking and/or restorative justice in state court systems. So one step is to utilize the talent that we have on the Tribal State Federal Forum. And we have judges, tribal judges, we have state judges, we have judges of color in the communities that you're coming from. So that's an institutional base that you can come to as a resource, and we will help you. But even more importantly, to me, you know, this hit me a long time ago, but I think it goes back to Michael Jackson's man in the mirror. You know, I mean, if you want to make the world a better place, take a look at the mirror and make a change. So it starts internally. This goes back to what Nicolette is saying. The challenge is introspection. And so you listen, you learn, you incorporate, meaning it comes within, and then you act. You know, we have to act. And so there's a saying that always helps me. It helps me to center me and helps me to sort of bring it down to base. It says, mind your thoughts, for your thoughts become your words. Mind your words, because your words become your actions. Mind your actions, because your actions become your habit. Mind your habits, because your habits become your character. Mind your character, because it is who you are. And I think that's where you start, and then we just keep seeing each other. We see the spirit in each other. I don't know, you know, Belinda Doolin and I mean, my wife had trained under her. I heard great things about her. My wife and I both knew her stepfather, great leader. But when we started to talk about it, you just go boom. Same thing happened with Ms. Hurd. We sat down there in a hallway with the work you were trying to thinking about, boom. First time I met Ellie Sabat, I said, you are the savior I've been praying for the last 30 years, trying to do it. So anyway, I think there's an institutional hub that has resources that we can assist you. But again, I would start internally and think in those ways, and it'll open you up.
Thank you, Judge. Prosecutor Sabat.
I'm definitely not a savior, though I appreciate the kind words. You know, and really, I think that this gets to, you know, what I was going to say. We're really fortunate in Washtenaw County to have the institutional actors in place, all working from the same playbook in terms of the courts, the public defender's office, the prosecutor's office, and then of course we've got a tremendous partner in the Dispute Resolution Center that is actually, you know, prepared to step up. And we can talk about diverting, deflecting cases all we want, but at the end of the day, we need someplace to deflect and divert them to. And I think, you know, that's and that's the biggest blessing for a community that wants to move into restorative practices is, you know, the prosecutor can sit up here. You know, if I'm in another county, I can sit up here and say I like restorative justice a whole lot, but until you have somebody that's, you know, actually going to be able to facilitate it, it doesn't do you an ounce of good. So, you know, what I would suggest doing in other communities is first and foremost, you need to have the actors in place and the institutions in place that can actually do these, they can actually do restorative justice, whether it's, you know, through a peacemaking court, whether it's through, you know, a partner like the Dispute Resolution Center, because you know, otherwise you can go to the political actors like prosecutors or whatever, and I'll tell you what they'll say. They'll smile. They'll say, "Boy, that sounds really nice," because they like giving you yes answers. They'll go say, "But gosh, we just don't have the infrastructure here, so I'm down to do it, but we got to build out the infrastructure." And you know, from an individual level, I'd say, you know, this can start on just sort of getting trained and getting familiar with restorative practices yourself. You know, working to build that infrastructure out locally. If you want further reading on this for folks that may be new to restorative justice and how it works, I cannot recommend highly enough Danielle Sored's book, Until We Reckon. We just gave copies of that to all of the victims advocates in the prosecutor's office. It will really shift you know, how you think about justice, but it's about building that sort of ecosystem that can be supportive of restorative justice, and then, you know, you got to get the right, and once you have that in place, the ask is a little bit easier. You say to, you know, the prosecutor, public defender, judges, whomever, are you, you know, now are you okay diverting, deflecting some cases out into restorative justice? And if you already got the infrastructure there, it's a lot harder for them to say no. So that's what I'd recommend doing. But again, it's, you know, we are tremendously fortunate in Washtenaw County that we've got the pieces in place, and we're just putting them together now. And what I'm hopeful is for folks in other parts of the state, in a couple of years, if you're building out this infrastructure, you can point to Washtenaw County and say, look, it's working there. Here's some stories from Washtenaw County, and we can really serve as a model as we expand restorative justice, and this can spread across the state.
Thank you, Ellie. Ms. Horde.
Thank you. So it is so important for us to utilize our community resources. I think that one of the things that we don't give a lot of credence to is our, let's see the politically correct way to say this. All of the people that are actually in the community that have gone through this process that want to help, okay? So I think that those are the people that sometimes we turn a blind eye to, which is difficult. If a person has gone through the legal process themselves and they want to mentor a young person, we need to reach out to them. We need to include them. We need to give them a voice and give them something that they can be proud of and saying, hey, this was my path in life and this is what you should not do. And here's how I can help, right? But sometimes they don't know that we're in need the way that we are, right? Utilizing resources such as My Brother's Keeper, utilizing faith-based resources. Most importantly, a lot of things that our young people get to experience, they get to experience it because they are in, unfortunately, the justice system. So as I spoke about the Youth Arts Alliance, the Youth Arts Alliance needs to be in every system of restorative justice because it is something that it utilizes healing. It utilizes a sense of transformation through the arts. Many of our kids are extremely talented, and we would not otherwise know that but for them being in the detention center and them being able to publish a book of poems or get to read their poem at a Youth Arts Alliance event and get to perform in front of tons of people. So I think that if we're looking from a community standpoint, we need to engage our actual community. We need to say, these are the things that we hope that we can get our young people involved in. And I am telling you, people will show up and show out. There are so many community organizations that are ready and willing to work. We just have to reach out to them. We have to just get them involved, let them know, like, this is the call to action, and this is what we need you to do. And I think that anyone thinking of implementing any sort of restorative justice practice certainly needs to get their community involved.
Thank you. Ms. Doolan.
Yeah, and I would add to that restorative justice is actually a movement that has been in motion for quite some time, and it is intended to be community-based. When we think about its indigenous roots, it is rooted and grounded in the sense of community where everyone is valued and everyone has value, and everyone contributes to the well-being of of his or her community. So we have to get this rooted in the community, and that's sort of the balance I try to strike at the DRC. We work very closely with institutions, but I'm always holding on with the other hand, that sense of community. The people in the community throughout Southeast Michigan, as I understand it, because I field a lot of calls, I'm a part of many conversations, residents, tax-paying members of our community are ready for something different than the old traditional systems. Parents are ready for something different from their schools and institutions. Voters are ready for something different. So when I look at restorative justice work and the practices as a movement, just like every other movement that we've experienced in the United States, it is very community-centered. So I think we have to think about that and get rooted in the community. And I ask institutional leaders to pay attention to community members, to listen, take the time and listen to us. And use those resources that you are the custodian of, that you are the shepherd of, and use it in a way that is most beneficial to the community. Take the time to serve your community. That's, for some elected officials, that is your low-hanging fruit. To be responsive to the needs and the cries of your community. We are asking for something different because the other way is not working. So I would encourage communities to do that. Another thing that I said, this is a movement that is going across the country and I know in other parts of the world. There is so much information available today than there was even 10, 15 years ago. You can Google most things, you can buy books, you can read them, but the models are out there. Practitioners have taken the time to write down their experiences to be a blueprint to help other communities build and design, design and build their own approach to restorative justice work for their own community, be it within their court system, be it within a school system, be it at the local Y, the after school programs where kids gather. How do we help them learn from conflict, keep relationships intact, be safe, be vulnerable, support, be empathetic? We can help kids do that anywhere. We can do that. Dr. Monique Morris said you can do it on your front porch. We can do that. And she wrote the book about girls being highly suspended from school. So there are ways that all community members can be involved in this, and we can all play a role in it. But I would ask those who are in leadership positions to use your superpowers for good and listen to your community members and work with them. You don't have to do it to us or for us. Restorative justice gives us an opportunity to work together and build together. And at the DRC, I'm just feeling very proud that we have a chance to do that with the peacemaking court and now with the prosecutor's office. They're not doing it to the DRC, believe me, we're doing it together. We're creating and working together and in response to what the community has said. And we've been listening to the community on this. I think for the peacemaking court, our first steps was to bring community members together. We did that for several times in the first year, and we just listened. All the time we were listening and tweaking and shifting and designing and responding. And now look where we are. Now we have a foundation that we can build something bigger on. So that's my response for you.
Thank you, Belinda. And thanks for everybody for answering the moderator questions. I want to switch to the audience Q&A. And so I'll ask the question, anyone can chime in if you'd like. The first question is actually directed to Prosecutor Sabat, though, specifically. How involved is the prosecutor's office in informing victims that alternatives are actually available, i.e. people mostly want what they have learned is available?
That is just a phenomenal question, and is exactly what we have been working on building out in the prosecutor's office in a partnership with the DRC and the public defender's office and the courts. Because look, this is a sort of change in perspective, both for folks in the prosecutor's office and the legal system, but also for people that are coming through it. Most people that are survivors of a crime, they don't know restorative justice exists. They're not aware that it's an option because you don't grow up on TV shows that focus on restorative justice. It's like Law and Order SVU, right? And you see the traditional criminal legal system, and so you think that's what's going to happen. So actually, what we have been doing is really working at training out our victims advocates who will make the first contact with the survivor. It's their job to coordinate with the survivor and to make them feel heard and to make sure that their voice is being taken into perspective in the case. And we've got just a phenomenal, and I couldn't have asked for a better one. We've just got a phenomenal victims advocate coordinator here at the Washtenaw County Prosecutor's Office who's been working with us on this. And as we said, we gave them all a copy of Danielle Sered's book, but it is going to take some time. And the truth of the matter is we're going to inform survivors of eligible crimes about availability of restorative justice at the outset, and we're going to build in systems in which that's done in every case. But I think, quite frankly, until we start seeing success stories and until this starts taking root in the community, folks are going to be a little bit skeptical of it, and we've got to be aware of that. It's only once we start seeing success stories and once we start seeing people go through this and heal and have the person that committed harm be on the right track, and have the person who was harmed be able to move forward with their life and be able to really have amends made that are individualized and personalized. That's when this is really going to take root in the community. So this is, it's not something that we're just going to snap our fingers or flip a switch and it's all of a sudden going to be something that like everybody's beating down our door and wants. I think we're all eyes wide open on this. This is fundamentally about a real change in the culture and in how we do things in the prosecutor's office and the criminal legal system writ large. So it's going to be a long project, but at the end of the day, we know from elsewhere this works. We know from elsewhere this is what survivors ultimately want to a large degree. And, we're just going to be working together to make sure that we give every survivor that choice and ultimately that this takes root in the community, so people know about it and feel like they have a real choice in how a case in which they were harmed proceeds.
Thank you. Next question is kind of Washtenaw specific, but I'm sure people can broaden it out a bit to their own communities. Nicolette, you kind of touched on this a little. What are some ways in which individuals or communities of faith can support restorative justice for youth here in Washtenaw County? Ways that would be helpful, i.e. doing good and not simply meaning to do good.
So I think just being present and being open to being connected with our young people is one of the best ways. I do think that if there are community resources, a lot of times some of my families are in need of basic need support in terms of food or clothing. If there is a way for that information to be communicated to the court and to other neighboring areas, I think that would be one of the best ways that communities of faith can start to offer that support and get that conversation started. I do know other organizations like Sure Moms, Ms. Flo, she does amazing work with our moms. If those types of organizations could be made aware of any sort of faith-based support, I think that those would help to ground those community organizations for our young people.
Anyone else want to add to that particular question? Happy to keep going. And shout out to Flo and Sure Moms too. It's bad having a Washtenaw moderator because I'm gonna, all right. Next question. Are restorative justice practices made available when there is no clear victim/survivor? This person is thinking specifically of the story of the young Black girl here in Michigan last year who was sent to juvenile detention for not doing her homework near the beginning of the pandemic.
I don't want to take up too much time, but can I just add that there was an amazing forum where we heard from this young lady. Jason did an excellent job on putting that on and supporting her. I do wish that there had been a restorative practice, but I will just say here in this county, we are not sending any young people into the detention facility for not completing their homework. But I do think that there need to be more conversations just around the way that we treat education and the connection between education and our justice system, and better transitions for young people who are getting out of placement facilities or getting out of detention to go back to school, offering them support, specialized support. JT Sangsland and Holly Heveland do a great job here in helping me with that transition for our juvenile drug court and other programs. But I think it is very important that we are looking at the connection between school and the justice system and making sure that young people are not feeling any sort of stigma if they are court involved when they're going back into school or transitioning back into school programs.
May I add, Jason?
Sure.
Okay. I just want to also lift up the idea that we've been talking about restorative justice practices in the context of criminal court and criminal things. and, you know, as they're labeled by our criminal justice system. But I want to also highlight the fact that in the peacemaking community, where our indigenous teachers and friends have taught us in the peacemaking court, this model can be applied to anything. There are areas where community building circles are done, and we can do that too, where there may not be a clear survivor or a clear, we may not even be clear of who did the harm, but there are ways that we can use this technique, this approach to dialogue to help people heal, to help people be heard. And as a practitioner, we call them community building circles. So that's something that can be done. The DRC has done, and I facilitated personally, community circles with educators, where they were just able to talk openly and freely in a safe space, to talk about the concerns that they had, to also address their strengths, and to build upon that to get through maybe a crisis in the school building. So we can use this work in a lot of different ways. You can use a community dialogue or a peacemaking circle to celebrate. I have to remind myself of that. We often talk about the negative things that are going on, but we can also use it as an opportunity to come together as a community and to celebrate, to maybe to discuss a change in our community, to introduce someone to our community, to re-enter. I encourage those who work in the justice system to think about re-entry of individuals through a circle. How do we embrace them? How do we remind them that they have value, they have a place in our community? So we can apply this in different ways. And I would love to see, as one out of 2,400 nonprofits in Washtenaw County, I just heard that number a few weeks ago, which amazed me. I would love to see all of the nonprofits lining up and having those safe spaces for community members to come to have these conversations in circle, these restorative dialogues, be it within a family, be it within a neighborhood, be it within the Black Club, the neighborhood association, and not be so reliant on calling the police, waiting for things to really go awry, and then we have to call the police in. This is a real discussion that we can have. How do we create that safe space and talk about our community needs and the roles that we play to keep our communities healthy and moving well, and to embrace those individuals who might be troubled, who might need some additional support, and not have to rely on calling the police to intervene and then push us into down that path of the criminal justice system.
Thank you. Judge Connors, Ellie, want to add anything to that specific question?
The only thing I would say is echoing what Ms. Doolin was saying. From an institutional standpoint, I believe any type of case is potentially good for peacemaking. If you think about it, as judges, we don't control who comes in the door, but we can control how they're treated while they're there and how we send that case back out. So for me, the real question becomes, are the people who are brought in here going to have some kind of ongoing relationship, which means there's relatedness, you know, there's relationship there. And if so, what are we doing? What we do while they're there and we process that case and send it back out? Case is over, I've done what I'm supposed to do. Have we improved that situation potentially for those involved in the community at large? Or have we just added to the dismemberment of the relationship? So while the focus of your panel today, which is absolutely appropriate on youth, this is really about community, in my view. Peacemaking is really about creating that space and that place within our current institution so that any kind of conflict that comes in the door, it's available and we'll try to work with it so we send it back out better, in a situation better than it walked in the door. So, you know, one of the things we talked about, Belinda and I, when we talked about designing our courtroom, we want it to feel more like an urgent care center than a police station. And so that's why we'll come off the bench and we have we have the cases encircled with equality rather than the hierarchy on the bench. So any kind of case, I believe, is potentially available.
Sorry about that. Couldn't reach the unmute button. So we have time for one more question. Let's see here. This will be another Washtenaw focused one for the panel. How does the proposal from the Friends of Restorative Justice for a new Restorative Justice Center help meet the demands of the expanding needs of restorative justice resources in Washtenaw County?
I love to weigh in. I'm all behind it. I'll do everything I can to help build it. And while some might argue it's contrary to protecting the institution that I serve the public from, I think it's the most beautiful concept that we could have. And I'm all in on it. It absolutely is necessary. If we go over, I'm talking Judge Petoskey. Judge Petoskey is the one who brought peacemaking from the Navajo to the tribes here, who's tribal. They have just built in all his career, and I hope we model our restorative justice center like that. They have a Waukegan Tribal Court and Peacemaking Center, but the emphasis is on the Peacemaking Center, and it is incredible. And that's what I would envision. We'd have something like that. Doesn't have to be absolute, in fact, shouldn't be on the same site. But we ought to put as much money into a restorative justice center as we put into our courts.
Any other thoughts? Well, thank you, and apologies for the folks, we couldn't get to your questions in time. I want to thank everybody for participating today. Thank you to all the panelists. As a reminder, as a part of our Restorative Justice Week, we are hosting a training, which is really an introduction to to collaborative and restorative conflict management with youth. The trainer for this session is actually the great Belinda Doolin. Unfortunately, registration is full for this training, but please keep a lookout for future trainings that we'll do. Maybe we'll do an additional one on restorative justice in the future. But again, thank you all to the panelists and everyone for participating. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you, Jason.